Hello, Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, Coach Brian Clinton enthusiasts, people who are ready for the softball playoffs, and people who get unnecessarily nervous and afraid that they're going to fail an optometrist exam. Like there's a way to fail that. So I did that this morning. I think if there's a way to fail it, I think I failed it this morning. This is the podcast for you. This is another episode of the Oklahoma Drill, a podcast fueled by OU Insider and the Rivals Network. I am joined, as always, Brian. Whose jersey are you wearing? Whose Thunder jersey are you wearing? I meant to ask you that. Shea Gilgis Alexander.
MVP.
I'm joined by Shea Gilgis Alexander.
Yes.
Are you nervous about the game tonight?
Yeah, I'm nervous.
You dominated in game 4. You shouldn't be nervous.
Oh, Shea, no, SGA is not. He's not nervous.
Yeah.
I mean, he was money. He was nails. But me, myself, Coach Brian Clinton Esquire, the third, yeah, I'm nervous. But, I mean, they're in it. It's 2-2. I mean, that was one heck of a turnaround. They figured it out. So you just needed to get back to OKC tied, and they did it. So
when's the last time you went to the optometrist?
I can't tell you. I have no idea. It's been a long time.
It had been since COVID for me, and I had
it's been longer than that for me.
Okay. I had I have really bad, like I've worn contacts since I was like 8 years old.
Okay.
And so I need to go way more often than I do. And turns out my prescription is like way worse. Like my eyes have gotten way worse. And I'm like, that's why my eyes have seemed off the last 2 years. That's
You're like,
cool. Yeah.
Looking at a score. Jesse, you need to go to the optometrist.
I got new contacts and I was like, oh shoot, I can see again. How cool is that? That's rad.
I've been super fortunate. I've knock on wood, I've always had 20/20 vision. Like I've always been one of those lucky people. My dad, I think I get it from my dad, thank goodness. So, and I don't think it had anything to do with like the whole carrots mantra when you're a kid. Like if you eat your carrots, you'll have. I hated carrots. like that doesn't have anything to do with it.
The lies that parents tell their kids, man.
Yeah. When I was 14 and I found out Santa Claus wasn't
14. 14. I had that figured out when I was 3. I was way ahead of the curve. It was way smarter than every other.
Like Ron Swanson, you were running a steel mill by the time you were 3. You got hit by a bus. That was the one time you cried.
Oh man. Brian, softball. Postseason. It's here. Softball
this time of year.
Man, I am more excited for these playoffs than I have been in a really long time. But I think for Oklahoma, it feels really good because they crushed their way through the Big 12 tournament last weekend in Oklahoma City. You and I were both there for every game. And OU outscored their opponents 28-4 through 3 games, including a pretty dominant win over Texas 5-1 in the championship game. Was not enough to get them the number 1 overall seed in the tournament for the first time since 2018 or 29. They had done it 2019, 21, 22, and 23. So a little bit of difference for them, but still locking up the number 2 seed with, I think, we're back type of performances from OU softball last weekend. 10-1 over Kansas, 13-2 over BYU, 5-1 over Texas. What stood out to you about the way OU played in Oklahoma City, and how big is that heading into the postseason?
I'll be completely honest with you. The thing that caught me off guard most, which this, maybe I shouldn't word it that way. The thing that I was most pleasantly surprised about was how stinking good Nicole May looked to close the game against Texas. Like, just she came in and was absolutely terrific. It was really impressive. Like, and the other thing was whatever offensive slump Oklahoma was in, it kind of seems to have disappeared. At least for now. They looked really good on the base pass. They were aggressive. I mean, one play comes back against BYU. One play comes back to mind where Kenzie Hansen pushed for a triple, and gets thrown out there, and it was just an excellent play from the third baseman. But she ends up scoring, I think, a couple of runs on that hit, and just how aggressive they were. It felt like they were like that mentality switch had kind of been flipped. And I don't know that it necessarily was anything different that Coach Gasso or anybody else was doing. I think that was just more of a like the team just felt more in it, I guess. Like it sounds weird. Maybe it's because they were in Oklahoma City and not Norman. I mean, I don't think that has anything to do with it, but the team that was out there this past week looked way more like the team that we've been used to watching the last couple of years. And I think it all kind of goes back to that Sunday win. So, I was impressed. I was really impressed.
I think you saw what you wanted to see when there were legitimate questions about what OU was going to look like. Did they get shaken against Oklahoma State? Was that Sunday, was that game 3 win more indicative of where they're at? I think you just saw, like, to me, Brian, I think you just saw more decisiveness, and
That's a good way.
and it's weird. Like, OU can flip the switch better than anybody, and they'll say you want to play at the same standard all the time, but in the postseason they just flip a switch. And I think, like, I mean, even think about how much they took care of BYU, a team that kind of gave them fits in Norman a few weeks ago. They just took care of them
and looked dominant against Oklahoma State. Like,
yeah.
I mean, really. So, you're right.
I'm still shocked by that. I can't, like, BYU just mopped the floor with Oklahoma State, completely took away the Bedlam rematch.
Well, I think that was the first time in Kenny Gajewski's tenure there that they had 5 errors in a game. It just looked they looked out of sorts. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It was impressive.
Don't give me the Bedlam hangover thing. That's not you specifically.
No. I don't think that's what it was. They were just out. That was just a bad. You have bad days sometimes. Like that just happens.
Didn't Gajewski kind of allude to that though after the game?
I think somebody asked him a directed question about it,
okay.
and he kind of said, maybe, but he kind of, I want to say he kind of deflected it a little bit. But I mean, it's not. It's obviously it's the first question that was going to be asked by somebody, but no, I mean, if you're there are no hangovers. If you're a national championship contender, there's no hangovers. That's not how this works. You do have bad days, but oof, I mean, that was rough.
It was. Anyway, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think offensively OU just, and I think it wasn't only the way the offense got going, but I think it was that it got going early in all 3 of those games. There were no slow starts. That was really the thing that helped them against Texas, was the 2 runs in the first inning.
Yep.
To me, that was what stood out, right?
And Patty alluded to them liking getting to set the tone offensively, like, because you think about it, they haven't really been able to do that in the postseason very often. They've always been the top seed, and so that's the one thing that comes of the seeding is if those 2 teams do meet up in the national championship, which I think I heard so many people say that this past week. In that first game, OU's going to bat first. So, it's really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're 1 through 8, you're good. But it was really interesting to see them in a spot to set the tone. And you're right. I mean, that absolutely played a huge factor in that Texas game, because they were up 2-0 before you knew it. And it was good.
To me, it was there were so many players up and down the lineup that had really good weekends offensively. But to me, this was, if the whole season wasn't the breakout party for Ella Parker, this weekend was, or this past weekend was. She was incredible. I mean, I voted for her for most outstanding player. I thought it was easy. I thought it was an no-brainer, to be honest
100%.
with you. I can't remember exactly what she hit. I think she went, I know she went 5 for 6 in the first 2 games. She went 5 for 6 with 6 RBIs, because that's
And I
She
think she went 2 for 4 against
2 for 4.
Texas. I
Hmm.
think.
So yeah, I think she went. Yeah, so she went 7 for. She went 7 for 10 those 3 games.
Pretty good.
Really good. I think with 8 RBIs.
Yeah.
She was just like, to me, that wasn't. It was just. Patty has talked all year about how Cassidy, Pickering, and Ella Parker are not typical freshmen, but you saw that in a
Yes.
postseason setting that was important to OU for a lot of reasons. This was not a sleepwalk through, wake us up when I mean, they wanted these games, and you could tell they wanted these games. And like, if there were any doubts about Ella Parker, and not that there should have been in any way, shape, or form, but like her ability as a true freshman to, I mean, I think she not only has claim as maybe the most consistent hitter in this lineup, she really might be, or even most versatile already. But think about what she's going to be next year and the
Mm.
year after that, dude. I mean, she's going to be the premier offensive player on this team as soon as next year. She just
Yep.
is.
100%. Yeah. The look no further. Jocelyn Erickson, what she has done at Florida. I know it's a hard loss for Oklahoma to look at that, but just the trajectory from year 1 to year 2, just what I mean, she's the SEC player of the year. Like you've got that. Ella Parker is going to be an offensive weapon of that magnitude. Like she's already shown that. And I think to me it felt like you just said, the coming out party, like I think she's going to play a huge role for this team going forward in the next couple of weeks. Like I think that she's going to be a major part of what Oklahoma does offensively.
No, I agree. And then I think pitching wise, I think you saw what you needed to see. Kelly Maxwell was dominant. And again, even in the Big 12 tournament, if there was any doubts about how much they're going to throw Kelly Maxwell, they threw her against Kansas and threw her against Texas.
Yeah.
They're going to lean heavily on Kelly Maxwell. And she was great. Proved that Oklahoma State weekend. Don't worry about that. She was just really, really good, really solid, really consistent. She recovered really well from the bad start against Kansas when Kansas rattled
Mhm.
off 3 straight hits. Thought she was really good, and they're gonna. I mean, she's the ace. She's who they're gonna lean on. Did think it was pretty interesting that Kirsten Deal got the start against BYU, and outside of that last, she is the queen of being 1 or 2 outs from a no hitter.
Oh
Nobody,
man.
nobody
Yeah.
does that like Kirsten Deal, man. Um, but I thought that was pretty interesting. That I mean, Kirsten Deal was a really good bounce back for her after really struggling against Oklahoma State.
Hmm.
No Carly Keeney. No Carly Keeney. It was Peyton Monticelli that got the relief against Kansas.
That was awesome for her to come in and get that strikeout. I
Yeah,
was so happy for her. That was cool.
yeah, that was great. But no Carly Keeney, which I thought was interesting. And then Nicole May, no starts, but she came in relief
Mm.
and killed it against Texas.
Yeah.
And that made me think about, for one, I don't think there's a strict schedule for the pitching staff. I think they're going to play it game by game, but I do wonder if they've internally made that decision of like, okay, we can't bring Kirsten Deal out of the pen. She needs to be a starter. How much does that shift things around? And is Nicole May? I mean, Nicole May will get some starts in the postseason, but is she going to be? I wonder how much they'll use her out of the pen.
The
That was
Sandman.
what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah. The Sandman treatment. She's
Yeah.
one of the better. I mean, she looked fantastic. Like that. I can't remember. I cannot remember a game this year, and this is no slight to her, but I'm having a hard time remembering a game where she looked that good in a high pressure situation. That was the most. I don't think I'm jumping out on a limb there saying that was the most important game of the year for Oklahoma up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And she was lights out. I mean, and against the lineup that she was going against at Texas is incredible on the offensive side of the ball. So for her to go through that, she didn't allow a hit. Like it was impressive.
Yeah, she was just in control, and I
Yeah.
think that's what stood out. But again, it makes me wonder how are they going to handle this? I mean, regionals and moving forward, how are they going to handle this pitching staff?
Yeah, I would obviously you said Maxwell, like she's going to be your pseudo ace pretty much. Like she's not the only arm that Oklahoma has, but she's going to be treated as the ace here. Um I do think the stats are there like for Kirsten Deal, she's much better out of as a starter than she is out of the bullpen. Um, Carly Keeney's going to get her run. Like you just with what she showed in that final Bedlam game, I think she earned a lot of, not that she didn't already have respect the coaching staff, but like you could tell that it meant a lot to Patty that she was able to put her in there in that situation and avoid the sweep. But she was also just fantastic against a red hot Oklahoma State offense. So that was big. You know, I think one thing that I thought was interesting was somebody asked somebody asked about Kelly Maxwell on Friday. I believe it was on Friday. Or no, maybe it was Thursday. Maybe it was Thursday after her first game against Kansas. Somebody asked about how she was looking, and Patty had talked about her hitting another level, like she was getting to another level, and that they expected to see that from her. Like that to me, the 2022 Women's College World Series version of Kelly Maxwell was unstoppable. Like she was, and I don't, we haven't seen that version of her, but the one we just saw in Oklahoma City was pretty darn close to it. I mean, she was exact. She had control every time a new batter stepped into the box. She was in full control of what was going on. And outside of that first blip against Kansas, I mean, she was nails.
Yeah, she was. And so after all that, OU, I think, had a legitimate claim to the number one seed, but I think it makes sense that Texas
Sure.
got the number one seed. They, I think, had all the advanced metrics. They were first, not only in all the polls, but RPI, really the last few weeks. But we look at Oklahoma's, for one, I thought Selection Sunday was really interesting for a variety of reasons.
Mm,
My apologies
yeah.
to Tennessee and Duke, especially. Goodness, man. Um, those teams, dude, those teams are in. Um, I don't know. Anything surprise you before we get into the OU regional? Anything surprise you about Selection Sunday?
Um, Duke not getting a top 8 seed. Like their path's not terrible. Like it didn't break out awful for them, but for them to be a 10 seed after going 47-6, they've been on like my short list, and maybe I just don't watch enough softball, but they've been on my short list for teams that should have been locks for ones. I mean, they were just impressive throughout the season. Whenever I remember us talking about them at the beginning of the year, game 2 or 3 against Oklahoma, they were fantastic. Like I mean, defensively, they were clean. They did a good job in the circle. They pushed Oklahoma, and I was surprised that they ended up all the way at a 10. Um, I think they'll get through that region pretty easy. I think they'll take care of South Carolina. It's probably who they're going to end up with. The Knoxville region, as you kind of mentioned, Miami, Ohio is. I remember I texted someone before the selection show came on, and I said one of the things I'm watching for is where Miami, Ohio ends up, because whoever draws them as a 2 seed is going to have their hands full, and it's Tennessee. Um, if there's a team built out there to withstand them, it's probably Tennessee, given their 1-2 punch at pitcher. But that team can hit the ball. That team can really hit the ball. So that one's tough. And then I think the last one was that stuck out to me was uh, Arizona landing in Fayetteville. I think Arizona can. I believe those two teams played earlier in the year and split a series. Um, I could see Arizona winning that one. We're going to have some unseeded teams advance. It happens. I think we had 3 last year and 5 the year before. Um, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of who's it going to be.
Yeah. No, I agree. And you look at OU's regional, it's Cleveland State, Oregon, and Boston University. Those games start on Friday. Obviously, in Norman, it's Oregon and Boston University at 4:30 on Friday. Then OU plays Cleveland State at 7 o'clock on Friday. Brian, going through the numbers, and obviously you wrote a story over at OUinsider.com looking at all these teams. I think this is for the most part, a pretty favorable regional for OU.
Mhm.
I think, but going through the numbers, looking at it, I don't really expect Oklahoma to be seriously challenged. I just don't. The thing that is maybe a little interesting is that Boston University is a really good offense. Boston has a really good offense. Top 20 in most major categories, including runs per game. I
Mhm.
actually think they are. Oregon will be the name everybody knows, but I really think it might be Boston. That
Yep.
if there's anybody that's going to be a big challenge, it's going to be Boston. That's my view of it. I think I'm more interested, not trying to look past anybody. You gotta beat the teams ahead of you. OU's got to beat the teams ahead of you. Not trying to look past it. I think I'm pretty interested in what could happen for OU in the super regional. But what stands out to you about this regional? Anything, any concerns or anything that stands out?
Yeah. So Boston is, as you kind of said, they're good offensively, but I'm looking on NCAA's website at the moment. They rank first in the country in ERA, 1.26 runs per game,
Yeah, I
and
should have mentioned that.
they are third nationally in fielding percentage, 0.981. So they're actually statistically better than Oklahoma in those two categories. Now, they're playing in the Patriot League. It's a little bit different level of competition. They haven't seen anybody like Oklahoma. They haven't played a top 25 team in RPI this year. So it's a huge jump in competition. But you don't, I'll say this, especially in a game like softball or baseball, you don't get to 52-4 without being a very good sound team, like fundamentals wise. So I do think that's a team that could push Oklahoma a little more than maybe the fan base is comfortable with. But at the end of the day, I mean, I don't expect Oklahoma to drop a game. I don't expect them to, be on the fritz, going into week or going into game 7 after like an if necessary situation. But I do think Boston is capable of pushing them, and that's a team that they know how to win, and a lot of the time that's half the battle. So I like them to kind of push Oklahoma, but um, I mean, outside of that, Cleveland State's the one team in the entire bracket that's got a they've got a losing record. Oregon's not. I don't think Oregon is really something to be super terrified of. If you're Oklahoma, I think you should be able to handle that. It is interesting that and I'm going to get chastised for forgetting her name. Um, but longtime Oklahoma assistant. I know it. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, she's coming back to Norman to face Patty Gasso, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, it should be Oklahoma, and I think they're going to be playing Florida State in the semifinal or in the semi super regionals, but I am not super confident in that. So we can talk about that a little bit if you want.
No, I mean I was gonna say. I mean I would expect it to be Florida State too, and I do think that will be a pretty tough matchup for Oklahoma. Like they faced the challenge in Clemson last year, but I do think that regional could get pretty interesting. So I
Mm,
think that's going to be a monitor and see what happens. And obviously Oklahoma's got to get through this too. And I'm glad you mentioned Boston University being first in the ERA. I mean they're a top 20 team in offense and defense. I mean that's not a lot of teams that are top 20 in both. And you mentioned, yeah, that they play a relatively weak schedule, but I do think that could be a potentially good early test
sure.
for Oklahoma. I
Yeah.
was going to ask you, and I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this. Who is a player for OU that you're really focused in on, that you're really going to be watching, either in terms of what they do at the plate, what they do in the circle? what they do defensively. Maybe someone that's doing really well hasn't played particularly well. Is there any player in this lineup that you're particularly focused on? Because I'll give you mine, and that's Sydney Sanders. Sydney Sanders is the player I'm really looking at, because Sydney Sanders, if you remember last year, didn't play particularly well in the regular season, didn't hit particularly well, but then the postseason came and she took a real step up and was a key contributor last year.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This year she has struggled more than she did last year. I mean, she finished the regular. I mean, she's batting 263 for the year, and just after that home run bonanza she had in early March, it hasn't. It's been pretty tough for her, man. I think before she finally got a hit against Texas, she was 1 for her last 18 at the plate with 7 strikeouts and 6 walks. OU has enough firepower, but they need her to get going. I mean, she's soaking up a lot of at bats. She's getting a lot of playing time. They don't need her to bat 500, but they need her to bat better than 260.
Yeah.
So that's the player I'm going to be watching this weekend to see if she gets going like she did last postseason. Do you have a name?
That was my first thought, was Sydney Sanders when you asked me that question. But I quickly pivoted to another player. And maybe this is just because we've seen it happen every year she's been here, but it's like Kenzie Hansen elevates her level of play when postseason starts. The clutch factor like just hits another level with her, and it seems like every time Oklahoma was in a big, like it goes back to against Clemson, it goes back to against Florida State last year, against Stanford last year. When Oklahoma needed her, it was like it just so happened that it was her spot in the lineup, and she made things happen. And so I think, while this first weekend, I'm not looking for Oklahoma to get pressed super, super hard. I do think that when adversity strikes, she's going to be like the wall breaker for Oklahoma that she has been. She's always been the one to like push them through in the postseason on the offense side of the ball. And then obviously what she is, I think it almost, as imposing as she is at the plate as a batter, I think it almost kind of gets lost just how special of a player she is defensively, behind the plate. I mean, you don't run on Hansen. You typically don't see very many teams even attempt to do it. And she's just one of the best out there that there is. And so seeing her kind of go through the postseason one last time is going to be a little bit surreal, just because she's been such a big part of what Oklahoma has been. But yeah, I think she's going to be a big time factor for them.
I like the pick. The other name I'll mention is Tiari Jennings, who finally got some momentum going at the Big 12 tournament, because the last few weeks have been by her incredibly high standards. Been a little bit of she struggled a little bit at the plate to get things going. I mean, on the year she's batting 368, which is just really good instead of incredible, like she normally is. It's just really good. But I think, to your point about Kenzie Hansen, as good as Ella Parker is and how much they need her, as much as they're going to need the pitching staff to get going, as much as they're going to need Cassidy Pickering to step up, they need the veterans offensively. They need Jada Coleman and Tiari Jennings and Kenzie Hansen and Brito and Riley Boone. Those players are going to have to be really good. I mean, they just are. And this team needs senior leadership. We have seen the ups and downs again by Oklahoma standard. I think you can't afford, not this year, you can't afford some of the lows that OU's had. You just can't. This field is too good. There's too many good teams.
Yep.
Right? There just are. Before we head out of here, Brian, and again, we'll be at all the OU softball games this weekend. Brian and I will be. Brian, before we head out, you were talking about it before we started recording. Who do you have at your college, or at the Women's College World Series? What 8 teams do you have?
We've got Oklahoma making it. It's a big shocker there. I think they will be joined by Texas. Texas is legit. I think Oklahoma State's going to be there as well. I've got Florida beating Baylor in the Super Regional. I think Baylor's going to take care of Louisiana, but I think Florida is going to be the one that gets out of there. Stanford over LSU. So we've got Texas, Stanford, Oklahoma State, Florida, Oklahoma. I think Duke is in there. I think they get through. Missouri is who they'll face. UCLA is a team that I expect to get back. And then kind of the one shocker that everybody is going to look at and say, what the heck is he thinking? I think Miami, Ohio is going to beat Tennessee. There's plenty of reason for me to believe that I'll look a fool this time next week. But I like what they do offensively. They are on pace to beat Oklahoma's home run record. Like we talked about this before the show started. Like they're 59 home runs ahead of Oklahoma in the same amount of games. They've had 159 home runs to Oklahoma's 100. So that team can just flat out hit the ball. I think they'll beat Clemson. So I think you have two unseeded teams make that super regional. So you've got 7 seeds and 1 unseeded team. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun, man. I like those picks. I really do. Man, Stanford, Hydrate Kennedy. She's just insane.
Incredible.
She's just insane. She's the best pitcher in softball, obviously, with Jordy Ball on the shelf. I like the pick, man. I like the picks. I think this weekend we saw last weekend OU really step up into postseason gear. I think we're going to see that again this weekend.
Yeah, I agree.
This field's too good. They know they've got to raise their level.
Agreed.
It's going to be fun, man, and we will be there for all the action this weekend. First playoff games at Left Field. It's going to be fun,
It's going to be cool. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited for the atmosphere. Very comparable to OKC, so it'll be fun.
We're winning tonight, man. People, well, I'm knocking on wood. I'm not going to say anymore. I'm knocking on wood. Thunder are going to win. Knocking on wood. I knocked. That is going to do it for this episode of the Oklahoma Drill. Before I say anything else to jinx my favorite sports team. Another episode of the Oklahoma Drill. You can find us, as always, every single Thursday here on the OU Insider YouTube channel or anywhere you get your podcasts. If you are not a VIP member over at ouinsider.com, you absolutely just should be. It's just, what are you, dummy? Dumb person? You don't want to be a dumb person. You want to be a smart person. Go over to ouinsider.com, become a VIP member for just a few bucks a month. And you should also make sure to like and subscribe this OU Insider YouTube channel. You will get content essentially every single day on all things OU athletics. Tons of portal activity happen, both football and basketball. And of course, we're heading into the postseason for softball. Baseball postseason is right around the corner. All kinds of stuff you're not going to want to miss. And we cover it better than anybody here over at OU Insider. Until next time, we will see you next week on the Oklahoma Drill.